the obligatory few seconds. All right. Seasons bleatings, everybody. It is the festive season, and this is the final author interview of the year, Steve. I don't think you knew that. With me, I have Steve Kozeniewski, who is officially a Splatterpunk Award-winning author as of this year, after being nominated many times over the years. Who has, numerous very well-received novels and shorts all over the place, and a little bit of script work there and everything, Steve. So you've covered a lot of bases. So welcome, and, you know, Merry Christmas and all that. Happy holidays.
Thank you. Happy holidays to you. I see you have the tree up in the background.
Yeah, I thought I'd take this opportunity to showcase my tree.
Now we sent you. So we also work in a balloon shop.
Yes.
And I know last year we surprised you. We had a local balloon artist send you a big. It was supposed to be birthday tree, but we said, but also could you cover the Welsh Christmas thing? I seem to recall that there was just a big Welsh flag and then some Christmassy stuff.
It was. I mean this very kindly, because my balloon display was great. I just feel like perhaps your partner may have come up with something more creative for the theme you asked for, but it was lovely. I remember you telling me that you told her it was my birthday, my age, but said not to put my age on there. She had my age
anyway. Yeah.
giant balloon. No, that's fine. I'm okay with my age. Yes, I had a huge Christmas-themed birthday balloon piece with the Welsh flag on it a few times. And I think that is genuinely the most surprised I've ever been opening the front door, though, because I obviously wasn't expecting it, and it was enormous. So I was, but yeah, that was a nice surprise. So I think anyone familiar with either myself or Steve will know that we already work together a lot. I do lots of little admin things for Steve, PA type stuffs, emails, and we've worked on a few anthologies together that have been released through Steve's independent French press publishing. I always struggle trying to say that fast. And you recently started taking on authors outside of yourself and anthologies as well. And yes. I know you released Your Mind with Summer Canon that won the Imagine Award.
Yes.
That year, so that was amazing. And then last year was last year, Brennan LaFaro's Illusions of Isolation, which I'm still talking about to absolutely everybody. And then this year, Kit Power's Millionaires Day.
Which that's been very well received as well. So yeah, I'm hoping that we're not completely out of the running for Brennan. I think he's in the running for This Is Horror Award, so we'll see if that pans out. But I think Kit's book might be well, it's certainly award worthy.
Oh yeah.
But we're going to try and see if that's in the running for some awards next year.
Yeah. So yeah, you've got a pretty good track record so far with the authors you've taken on for your press. We'll circle back around to French press publishing, but I want to talk about your standalone work first. And okay. Your most recent release, Yes, I Am a Vampire. And in the synopsis, you do emphatically insist that you are not a vampire. There are no vampires. And it's a short story collection / autobiography covering a span of 6 years, is it?
3 years.
3 years, yeah, sorry. So do you want to talk a little bit about that? And because it is quite unique for the way that it's put together and the combination of fiction and nonfiction.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, that's what I was going for. So like you said, it covers 2013 to 2016 in my life. And what I wanted to do with this was, so my favorite part of a short story collection is the author notes. Mm-hmm. And people kind of treat it as like an obligatory thing, and they usually put like a paragraph or maybe even just a sentence where they're like, yeah, this was a follow-up to, The Rising or whatever. and I always want to know more.
Mm-hmm.
So I've been putting off putting this out for over 10 years. I mean, 11 years at this point, because what I really wanted to do was to do something different. So even though I had the length of stories to do this starting in 2016, I didn't want to just throw a cover over a collection and put it out. I really wanted to do something different with it. So I started last year in November for the event, which is no longer to be named, to write out really lengthy story notes on each of these stories. And because it was 2013, that was the year that Braineater Jones came out and my career started in earnest. So I was really going through the whole process of learning how to be an author, well, learning how to be a published author. I've been writing all my life. So it starts out, and I think you're the one that said this, I start out as like kind of a fresh-faced, baby author, like the world's my oyster kind of thing. And then I'm slowly like over the course of this book, like ground down, like, hey, here's what's actually going to happen. And, there's people that come into my life that people come in and come out. And, it's kind of sad, but you go, oh, yeah, yeah. And then there's people that came into my life in this time frame that like I'm still close friends with and I talk to on a daily basis and that sort of thing. So basically there is a framework, which is the autobiographical part, that's true. And I think you also said like I can't tell how much of this is tongue in cheek or how much of it is meta or whatever. Like everything that's I've written is true. And and it all builds up to my first big publishing blow up with Permuted Press, which was just like devastating, just set me back for years. And everybody's got a story like that. Like every author that has stuck it out a bit has a story of dealing with a nightmare publisher. So I realized that 2013 to 2016 there's a lot going on, like in my personal life. I got divorced, and I'm going to my first conventions with Mary Fan and Elizabeth Corrigan, and then I'm starting to work up to the point where, hey, I'm kind of a somebody. And the other potential title for this, I think it was going to be Not Nobody, but Not Somebody, or something like that. Like I said it a couple times in the book, where I went from being nobody and just a guy with a novel that was like walking around being like, hey, I have a novel, to like, I kind of have a niche in this world. But that's not what you imagine. Everybody imagines like, oh, I'm going to be Stephen King and I'm going to change the world. I'm going to have movies and I'm going to, do this and that. So one of the other things I wanted to do was to really address the realities of that. And I'm like, I am working a day job this whole time. I'm still working a day job to this day. I have not hit it rich. I have not hit it big. Like you said, I just got my first industry award about 4 months ago. You feel forgotten, you feel lost, and there is this old cadre of authors that like just from like the 80s and 90s that just like truly feel like I'm forgotten, I'm lost, nobody knows who I am. And so like I can kind of touch on that experience, because I'm like, it's been 10 years. I've seen people come after me who have greatly eclipsed me. So I understand that. But I also understand the being a new guy and wanting the world to be your oyster and then kind of carving out that little niche. So I'm like, I feel like I kind of am able to touch on all those different stages of being an author, at least touch on them with this book that's largely nonfiction, about half nonfiction. And then the stories are in there to, and I talk about this in the book. The idea of a collection is you've been paid. You were paid 25. Actually, for this entire book, and I talk about it in here, every story in this book, in total, I was paid a little less than $25.
Yeah, so this is the thing that I think we'll go on to the fiction as well, because some of my favorite shorts that you've written are in this collection. But the non-fiction part makes the book really unique in just firstly that it's a lot more detailed in the story notes, and it's detailed enough to be classed as an autobiography as well. And also you were really candid in the nonfiction part. So a lot of people will be like, well, I worked with this particular person I'm not going to name, but and like people dance around, they just won't tell you, even if it was public knowledge and everyone else has already talked about it. And that kind of stuff really drives me nuts. And I get it. I do understand why people don't want to, you know, they feel like they're blabbing, but also if it's already public knowledge and you're going to drop it into a book as part of your story and then just go, but I'm not going to actually tell you the details, it's a bit like, well, why have you put that in there? And then also, yeah, you were quite upfront about, generally speaking, like your sales and the financial part of it, which nobody ever will ever tell anybody. I think there's a bit of a in indie publishing especially, I think the fake it till you make it mentality applies a lot, because nobody wants to tell anyone, well, my book was really well received, but for me, well received is 20 Amazon reviews, as it is in my case. So, so I think, yeah, but I do think as well that because you were so upfront about how difficult, you're like, I got this novel, I saw someone wants to buy it, or someone wants to print it, and then you start getting really excited, and then it's a bit like you're a deflating balloon. You're like, oh, I see how it really is. And so I think especially for fledgling writers or people that have been writing and submitting for a while and maybe they're getting a bit frustrated, I think that the nonfiction part, especially of this book, it would be really comforting, because even though it's not, you know, well, I sold my novel and I got a massive movie deal and then it's still, it's not like negative to read about the hurdles. Does that make sense?
Yeah. And that was one of the reasons why I wanted to do this. I was like, well, there's no point in doing an autobiography that's not candid. But the story that we are always told, the story that we are always fed, is some version of, I'm a barista in New York City, and yet I can own a really nice apartment on a barista salary. And then I write a book about literally the events of this movie that you just watched, and then the book has sold out, immediately sold to a big publisher, and I made millions of dollars on the book, and now they're making a movie out of it. And I'm like, and that's like the John Green story. And I don't say John Green to be shitty, but John Green is somebody who has never had to sell a book. He sold his first book right out of the gate, and like famously said, "Oh yeah, I just sold that book and it sold for $1 million." It's not like that doesn't happen to some people, but I think my story is much more the story that most people are going through, which is, I remember that time when I remember it explicitly, where I was like, if I could just get published, that would mean everything. I don't care if I never sell a copy. If somebody believed in me enough to publish me, that would be enough. And like you said, then I got published. And I was like, oh, wait, that wasn't enough. There's more, and there's always more, and there's always more that you're going for. And yeah, like nobody's story is exactly like mine. But it's like anything, like in being specific and showing the specificities, I hope you can understand the greater that this is more likely what you are going to go through.
Yeah, that's something I was getting published before you and I started working together, but you have taught me some very valuable lessons about, and I've said this to you before, about the indie publishing world, in that, first of all, if you're an indie author, as in, and for anyone who's not really sure what that means, that just means that you're not represented by an agent being published through one of the big five, basically. Indie authors are people who self-publish, or they publish through independent presses and things like that. So it's not going to have the kind of marketing budget where you're likely to see your books turning up on the shelves of Walmart, Tesco, whatever, automatically. It's a lot of hard graft. You've got to do all of your own marketing, get all of your own reviews, and that's percentage-wise, that's can be quite a slog, because you have to individually ask every single person for a review, and then a very small percentage will say yes, and then a smaller percentage actually get round to it. So it's and the other lesson that you taught me right from the get-go was do not respond badly or publicly to negative reviews of your work.
Yep.
Carried that with me.
Good.
Told me that.
Good. And I have personal knowledge. I'm not going to out anybody, but I know world-class, top-tier authors read their reviews and get angry about bad reviews. Mm-hmm. So I know there's this whole thing that at a certain level you're like, oh, I don't even read my review. Like that's kind of like a badge of honor. Like I don't even read my reviews. Like, everybody reads their reviews. Everybody obsesses over the shitty ones. But the important thing is you don't grab a wine bottle, and this really happened. You don't grab a wine bottle and go and beat the reviewer over the head with it and drive from, what was it, England to Scotland and hit the reviewer over the head with a wine bottle because you're angry about a review. And
yeah.
And while that is an extreme, that is a real example. And while that is an extreme example, you're metaphorically beating your reviewer about the head with the wine bottle every time you go on Goodreads and respond to a review, or every time you go on Facebook and say, I got a bad review, I'm going to subtweet it here on Facebook, and all my friends can tell me how my review's not. I'm like, it's amateur hour. It's amateur hour. And yeah, I'm not going to pretend like I'm better than that. And of course I'm hurt every time I get a rejection or a bad review or anything like that. Of course it hurts. We're all human. Mm-hmm. But you have to get over that to have this career.
I view bad reviews as a positive sign that your work is actually organically reaching more people. Because when in the beginning, most of the people who are giving you your reviews, the first few reviews that appear are probably going to be people in your inner circle. And even if they think your book is trash, if it's a family member or something, there is no way that they're not going to give you a 5-star review and say something nice. So once you start hitting like the 3 stars, 2 stars, the hate comments, that's when you know, oh, Amazon's actually recommending my work to people, and more people are just seeing it and picking it up. And I feel like it can only be a positive thing. And also, sometimes negative reviews are funny.
Oh well, yeah, that's true.
I appreciate that you didn't even like. I remember when you told me that was because. So a lot of sites that regularly review your work used to be me by now, contacting them, be like, hi, Steve's got a new book, do you want this new book? And I remember you obviously telling me that, like, don't ever respond like all shitty to anybody because they say no or la 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 la. And I've watched so many people do that, and then it never looks good for the. I did once get not a negative overall review, but this person really hated the ending of one of my stories. And I did talk to him, but that was because he was also an editor. And I said, I hated my ending, but what do you think I could have done better? Because I knew that story was going to be reprinted. And I was like, I can get in and help. And he was like, oh, okay. But I didn't approach it like, with a pitchfork. It was a thank you very much for taking the time to write the review. And I was wondering if you have any suggestions, because I agree with you about this story. But generally speaking, it's a total no.
Well, now this might be speaking outside of school, but as a reviewer, have you gotten people responding to you and saying, go to hell,
I've had a few where, no. So there was one book that I reviewed that I was very critical. And I felt bad because it was the author's debut that they had self-published, self-edited, so they did it all by themselves. And I do try to keep that in mind, but also I don't want to recommend a book to somebody that's full of grammatical errors or whatever, and plot holes. So I was quite critical, and I felt really guilty about it. But I was like, well, they asked me to write this review, so I'm going to be honest. And I do try to be fair, and I did mention the things I did like and everything, but overall I couldn't see people buying that book because of what I said about it. But that person emailed me after and said, thank you for all of that feedback. I'm hoping you'll still take a look at the sequel. So and because of that, I have read and reviewed everything this person has sent me, because they were they was like, oh, I hope we can impress you a bit more with the next one. And I was like, okay. But sometimes I get people that I feel like they misunderstood. It's when I've written something that's a bit bad, like say a 3-star book, and I've had a mixture of criticisms and positive things. The negative stuff gets focused on a bit more, and then I've had messages like, oh, I hope you like my next book a bit more. And I'm like, oh, this is because I had to do a star rating on Amazon and Goodreads. And I think without the star rating, I don't think the author would have taken it.
Sure.
It's like, oh, because a 3-star read to me is that was a good book. I hate star ratings. They're so... I wish you didn't have to do it, but if you don't put a star rating on Amazon and Goodreads, then it implies the absolute trash.
Right.
I just didn't want to do a star rating. So yeah, but I haven't had anyone come at me really angrily yet, but I feel like that's coming at some point in my future, I'm sure. But you know, I only if I read a book that isn't a review request and I hate it, I don't write a review. But if someone has asked me for a review, I'll still post it.
Right.
So the only negative reviews anyone's ever going to see from me is when the author has literally asked me to write one. So
right.
Sorry, move back onto you now. This interview is about Steve, everyone, assure you. So the fiction part of Yes, I Am a Vampire. I love that title. And the back cover synopsis is really funny.
Thank you.
So these are the first bunch of stories that you had published.
Yes.
A lot of them are zombie stories, which is always good for me because I love zombie. I could see that where your mind was in the early days of your career, especially with a lot of zombies. And my favorite ever zombie short is in that book as well, which I was happy. That's just reminded me how long ago I was writing reviews for Ginger Nuts of Horror, quite far back when I first read it. So you have a mixture. So you've got some 100-word exactly. Are they called drabbles?
Drabbles, yeah.
Drabbles, and then just shorts of varying length. You've got sci-fi, you've got dystopia, post-apocalyptic, apocalyptic. Can you talk a little bit about I'm so sorry, I've forgotten the title, and I love that story. The sci-fi one with the...
Oh, The Keys to the Stars?
Yes, because that one is really different in the scope of the horror. So yeah, can you talk a little bit about that one?
Sure, and I think that's the longest one. So yeah, some of these are like 100 words, and I think that might have been 9,000, something like that. So I was just talking a minute ago about Mary Fan and Elizabeth Corrigan, who were we met through the publisher BRAINEATER Jones, which was Red Adept Publishing, and Mary was writing sci-fi, and she decided to put together. She and her publishing partner. Oh crap! I can't remember her name. Anyway, Mary Fan primarily was one of the editors of a series called Brave New Girls, and the goal was to write YA science fiction that would be good for young girls, and then it was a charity anthology, so all of the money from it went to STEM scholarship for young girls. So the problem that they were trying to address with this was girls reach a point, like I think it's like 10 or 11, and they talk about it in their various Brave New Girls anthologies. But girls are very interested in math, science, engineering, and tech. And then around 10 or 11, society starts to impress upon girls like math and science are not for girls. So the idea was we make these anthologies that girls will want to read and see themselves in and continue to pursue science and math and engineering, and then we'll contribute towards a STEM scholarship and to continue to encourage STEM education. So I sat down and I wrote this story, and it is set in a universe which I have not yet published, but I think you've read the Hyena universe, and this is my kind of grand, just kind of purely science fiction epic. And I knew that I wanted to have a young girl, and what I wanted to do with it was, you're probably familiar with the Hopkinsville goblin incident. So this is a very famous UFO incident that took place in the 50s, and they were very different from your standard gray aliens, which have just kind of taken over the quote unquote real life UFO universe. Like, people assume if there's an alien visiting Earth, it's a gray.
Yeah, everyone's just pictured one.
Yeah, right.
Yeah.
But in the 50s, in was it Hopkinsville, Kentucky, or somewhere, they described these little goblins, like not unlike the Gremlins from the Gremlins movie. And it's a very unique, unusual UFO event. And I've always wanted to write a story about that. And I wanted this to dovetail with the whole thing about girls going into science, that kind of thing. So I wrote this story, and again, it's a story with not really a horror element, and it's YA, which I don't do. So it was very much going outside of my normal wheelhouse. But I do, have a great passion for science fiction, and I had a great passion for this cause, so I wanted to contribute something to it. But yeah, that's where that came from.
Yeah, I really loved that character because yes, in the sort of initial adventure she's having there, she's real clever and mature, but also still has like that childlike wonder of like, okay, well, I'm just accepting this.
Right.
Kids have got a much easier time just accepting that a thing is true and happening than adults do.
Right.
And I thought that you captured that really well. And I do, yeah, I think that whole book would be a great read for. I'd love to give that to my preteen daughter if I had one.
Right.
As good, like, inspiring stuff to read. And yeah, your story is very it's sci-fi, but there's something very magical feeling about it as well. It's really maybe this is why it doesn't just stand out because it's that kind of sci-fi. It's just very wholesome.
Right.
And your other stories are things like exploding shit zombies, for example. Right. So it was like and that one that sci-fi one I hadn't actually read before, unlike a lot of your zombie fiction. So when I got to it, I was like, oh, this is a completely different flavor of your writing. So I do think that collection on the fiction side as well is a good sort of range of the fields you write in. And that does segue me nicely onto the HEMATOPHAGES, which I have to talk to you about because that's my favourite of your novels, I think. I go back and forth. I have a few favourites, and I think it depends on my mood, but most often that one's my favourite. And also the in-universe novella Skin Wrapper as well. I really loved that. Again, sci-fi. I always think I'm not that much of a sci-fi horror person, but I guess I am because I do enjoy all of your space stories. So for anyone who hasn't read the HEMATOPHAGES, which I've only recently learned to pronounce, I was saying it wrong for years. It's a space story about a crew that find a blood planet, and there might be some parasites. And the thing that I didn't even realize until I was about 2/3 of the way into the book, I suddenly thought, hang on a minute, there are no men in this book. And I didn't notice it. It wasn't like a glaring thing that I even noticed initially, because you didn't make a point of being like, hi, this is a completely female cast. And I remember asking you about that, saying, oh, there's no men. How come there are no men in this book? And you were like, if there were no women in it, would you have noticed enough to comment? Correct. And I was like, oh my God. I mean, maybe these days I think I would notice it now, but I'm very aware of imbalance in the publishing industry at the moment. But I think maybe if I'd read it 6 or 7 years ago, I probably wouldn't have even thought about it. So yeah, did you set out to write a sort of a female only horror novel, or did that just sort of naturally happen with the characters?
It was intentional, and it did come from what you were just talking about, which is that there are a number of science fiction stories, from primarily from the 50s and stuff, but it's not like it was completely passé. It was still happening in the 90s, where it's just men. And like I said, you don't even think about it. It's just that they wrote this story, and for whatever reason, it was a war or something, and they're like, okay, well, all the characters are, and there's like literally no female characters. And I said to myself, when I was doing the world building, because people ask me this question all the time, I've been very overt about it. I am not trying to be cagey. I didn't do it to be cutesy, but in universe, I've always said it makes no sense to have male astronauts after a certain point. If you are colonizing other planets, it's really expensive to send an astronaut anywhere. So if you are colonizing other planets and you have the option of in vitro fertilization, it makes sense that you would only have females, because you would need to be building the population. So I'm like, from a very mercenary, which it is, it's a very mercenary universe. It's all ruled by corporations. Like, from a very mercenary logistical viewpoint, men do not make sense in a universe like this.
Or in general, that's a joke. For anyone who gets that she was a joke. Go on.
So yeah, I set about writing it, and there was a scene where they mentioned finding a male hematophage, and I tried to be really delicate with that, because I was like, I don't want to mention it overtly, but kind of in this scene it would come up, so I'm like, I'll handle it however I handle it. But I always have people coming to me, like you said, you were about 2/3 of the way through. I always have people coming to me and they're like, here's where I noticed. And some people, they're like, it wasn't even until they were off the space station I noticed. And some people, they're like, I didn't notice till I started reading the reviews and other people mentioned it.
Yeah.
And I'm like, that's really cool to me, because that says to me, and yeah, I mean, sometimes I get shit nowadays. To be honest, I think I know it's an all right book based on most of the reviews. So once in a while nowadays, people will be like, oh, he has no business writing a female perspective. But I'm like, nobody complained about it until you. So, okay, whatever. So I like to think that I just wrote these characters as characters, and the fact that they were all female, it wasn't meant to be a feminist statement, or I mean, it was definitely like, I knew what I was doing and I didn't want to make a big deal about it, and I don't really very much publicly advertise it that way. And yet it informs a lot of the story.
Yeah, it doesn't come across as that you're trying to make a point that everyone's a woman. It's just that they're all women, and I think that that's what really worked about all the characters for me, is because I notice it. I do notice it when clearly a woman's been included to include a woman, if that makes sense, and especially in cinema. And I think it's even harder to cover up in a book, because just because of the format and everything. And I do recommend it to people if they ask me for a good feminist horror rec. I do class it as, because it's an equality. It's representative of women, smart women who work in space, who are astronauts. So clearly they're complicated people that you have portrayed. And so for that reason, I would very much class it as or at least, feminist friendly. At least it's not, I think a lot of people think that feminist means man hating, which they're completely two separate things. But yeah, for people who are just looking for a good horror novel, especially a good sci-fi horror novel with good female representation, I would this is always top of my list to recommend. And then also Skin Wrapper, totally different story on its own, obviously, because it utilizes an aspect of the hematophages, which I'm really glad that you expanded on, because it's so much fun, because that book feels a little bit more straight up, I guess because it's a novella, so you get to everything faster, but this is space pirates.
Yes.
And it's so grisly that what you've imagined. So, do you want to tell people a little bit about your space pirates?
Sure. So I wanted to establish the skin wrappers, and this is no big secret, but what I try and do with each of the stories in the Hematophages universe is I try to take a classical monster and bring it without being like, here's the space Frankenstein, although it is always a, you know, like the Hematophages are based on vampires, the skin wrappers are based on mummies, and what they are is, so people who have skin conditions, who have skin cancer, in theory, the best thing for them would be to not lie down, because if your skin is in contact with the gravity, it's going to be hurting, it's going to be sloughing. So in theory, the best thing for a person with a skin condition would be to be in zero gravity. So I took that out to its logical conclusion, which was that there would be medical vessels that were zero G. And then the twist that I put into it was, so they wrap their skin sometimes, like where it's appropriate, so you get that mummy look. But then I wanted them to be vicious, and my thought was, okay, so they're space pirates, but they're all dying. They're all dying of cancer or other skin conditions. So what they would steal from you would be your organs, your blood, your body parts, your medical supplies maybe, but they don't so much care about money, because what good is money to them? So I had this concept, and in Hematophages, I really established that people are terrified of skin wrappers, and there is a major character who's a skin wrapper. And I think she was cool. I think she had a really cool part to play. I wanted that outsider. I wanted that pirate to come in and show that the Hematophages are such a threat that you would even work with the pirate in your hold, if you had to fight back against the Hematophages. But I had never, except for the fact that it's, a trick of writing, like, what King does when he kills off the famous characters with some new character to establish that, well, that's a threat because it killed off the main character. So it was just a writing trick where I was like, oh, all these people that are otherwise cool, calm, and collected, they hear the word skin wrapper, they're like, what? No, I don't want to deal with skin wrapper. But I hadn't really established why that was. So I got Hematophages translated into Italian, and the Italians asked me for a novella or a short story to go along with it. I was like, oh, well, this would have to be the story of the skin wrappers to establish why exactly the Ellen Ripleys of the world or whatever are actually scared of something. And so that's why it had to be as vicious and gory as you can possibly imagine. And I also wanted to do that thing where it was like a bottle episode. Like, she basically spends the entire time in a cryopod, possibly going mad, because she has that voice in her head that she thinks is her friend, but it might just be her going mad.
It was one of my favorite scenes actually in the Hematophages when they're like, skin wrappers. I was like, what's a skin wrapper? Like, it was very cinematic reading experience for me, because coincidentally at the same time I'd been watching Firefly for the first time, and I think I said I kept comparing them to the Reavers, but way worse.
Sure.
So it was like the same kind of thing as, like, the second you hear the word skin wrapper, it was exactly like with not exactly like with Firefly, but the same sort of like, oh, we're doomed, we're all dead, like, just panic. And then because you don't know as a reader what they are, so you're just like, what is it? And and then I didn't realize that you'd based them on vampires. the parasites. It's like I didn't read, and now I'm seeing the Mummy comparison as well.
Well,
With the
good,
as well.
good.
I didn't like because they're that's so cool. I didn't know you'd done that because they're very unique creation. Like I've read a lot of parasites and stuff of that ilk, but the hematophage, like the blood planet thing, like I don't know how your brain operates, but very well when you're creating locations and stuff like that, because I was like, what's a blood planet? And it's so disturbing. Just
Yeah.
everyone just picture a planet. Blood planet. Just yeah, it's quite what it sounds like. And yeah, I thought Skin Wrapper is one of the best universe tie-ins, sort of like prequel stories I've read to go with a main property. So I always recommend those two in particular to people. I know that we can't not talk about Brainator Jones a little bit, because I think that that's probably your most widely read book from what I've seen from reviews and everything, and how far reaching it is. So Brainator Jones concept is so funny to me. A guy wakes up dead and decides to solve his own murder, which and it's written in sorry, what's the decade it's in?
It's the 30s.
I always want to say 20s, and I know that's wrong, but yeah, set in the 30s. And that was your debut novel, wasn't it?
Correct.
So did you have an aim with that outside of just writing the story? Was there anything that you were, or that you realized later on that you were actually writing about?
Well, it's about addiction. And at the time, I believe I was working at at an addiction clinic, at an alcohol and drug clinic. So what I really wanted to do with that, and you can tell, you mentioned with Yes, I Am a Vampire, early on in my career, I was a zombie guy.
Mm-hmm.
And it hadn't quite exploded yet, because then Walking Dead was 2010. And I remember when that came out, and I was like, oh, good, this is going to, help zombie fiction. But then it exploded. Then it had a huge glut. Then it was like, well, you can't, publish a zombie novel anymore. It doesn't matter. So Brainator Jones, I wanted to do something different. I wanted to do smart zombies. But then I said to myself, well, why would a zombie remain intelligent, based on a crude understanding of biology? I was like, oh, well, maybe if you had enough alcohol to keep the brain preserved, so maybe they have to drink. And then once I'd established, oh, well, zombies have to walk around drinking, I was like, oh, well, then this needs to be set during Prohibition. And once it was set in Prohibition, everything else just started to kind of fall into place. I was like, all right, well, it's got to be like a Humphrey Bogart, hard-boiled detective, and he like high pants, fast talking. Hey, da, 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 da. So I did that entirely during the month of November in, I think, 2008, 2009, which you can tell because it takes place entirely in the month of November. And I wrote it basically like mind vomit. So that's up to Yes, I Am a Vampire. That's as close to my inner thought processes as anything I've ever written. Everything else is always very much edited and smoother and closer to, what I want to project as prose. But Brainator Jones is very much like how I think in my
Mm-hmm.
thinking process, because I was just writing at this speed
Mm-hmm.
and using a blend of my own slang and what I thought was slang from that era. And then the hardest part of it was going back and looking up and making sure that a lot of the slang was actually era appropriate and changing out words. So it's like a lot of it was booze and women. So I was like, well, is it dames? Is it hooch? Is it whatever? Like, and I liked that stuff, that kind of slang that we don't use anymore. That's not even like readily like, what the hell is he talking about? Like that to me is much more interesting than like, sure, we still say cool. Like
Yeah.
that's technically slang, but you don't even think of it as slang because you just know what it means. But like the things that are like very, very dated, and you almost need to take a second and be like, what's he saying? Like I that was probably the hardest part of that editing process. But the actual construction of it was just brain vomit, essentially.
It's really entertaining, that story. Like, just from the initial thing of just he wakes up dead, I was like, oh, okay, I see what's going on. So yeah, and in Yes, I Am a Vampire, in the story notes for that, um for a tie-in story, sorry for Braindeater Jones that's saying Yes, I Am a Vampire, you wrote about that someone made a comparison to another zombie detective PI book.
Oh yes, yes.
And yeah, that whole non-fiction section on the story notes for that made me laugh so much, because I think that that's really relatable for anybody that writes, especially early on in your writing. If someone's like, oh, that reminds me of da da da, instead, it's happened to me, funnily enough, with a zombie story, and it was the first thing I'd ever submitted, and it didn't make it into the whatever it was I'd sent. But my friend read it and said, "Oh, that reminds me of oh man, I always want to say Warm Bodies, and it's not. Oh, Breathers by S.G. Brown."
Okay.
Which I have now read, and now I take that as a massive compliment. But initially, my brain went, "Oh, damn it! Ah, someone beat me to it." And but yeah, my thinking has changed on that. If I get compared to other stuff now, especially if it's things I like, I'm like, "Oh, thank you." But yeah, that's yeah, I haven't read the other. I can't remember the name of the other PI book, but it's
Dan
really,
Shamble.
that's right. Yeah, yeah. Did you say that you sent a copy of your book, or you reached out to the? Yeah.
Yeah. So Kevin J. Anderson,
Mm-hmm.
and if you're watching this, Kevin, hey, congrats on the Dune show, because that's really good. The new Dune Prophecy show. He
Yeah.
wrote that. He wrote that
Oh, cool.
novel. Yeah.
Way to go, Kevin.
So Kevin J. Anderson, he's a pretty big wheel.
Mm-hmm.
He does the Dune stuff, like I said. He did a bunch of Star Wars stuff back in the day. Just generally a big name in the publishing world. And what happened was I wrote BRAINEATER Jones in 2009. I did not get it published until 2013. And in that 4-year period, I walked into a bookstore and I saw Dan Shamble on the shelves, and I went ape shit. And this is very much talking about what we were talking about before. This is very much a baby author thing. Like, you get really possessive about your ideas, like nobody could ever have the same idea as me, blah 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 blah. So I was very, very mad about that, and like unreasonably so. And
Yeah.
I've told him this. I've told him this to his face. And what happened was, I met Jonathan Mayberry at an event, and I handed him the book, and he said, "You know who would like this is Kevin J. Anderson." And I immediately, my heart sank. And then I was like, no, you know what? Sure, why not? So I sent Kevin a copy of the book, and I was like, hey, your buddy Jonathan Mayberry said you might enjoy this, and I was trying, like, despite my innate like stubbornness and like envy and everything, I was like, all right, be the bigger guy, whatever thing. Then I met Kevin, okay, and again, I don't know him from Adam up to this point. So I meet him at this event, and I'm like, hey, Mr. Anderson, my name is Steve Kozeniewski. And he looked at me and he went, I know you. You wrote that zombie detective book. And I was like, yes, sir. And he's like, you really helped me out. You really made me feel good about myself. You pulled me out of a slump. And I was like, why? What? Like, I thought I stole from you, or you stole from me. And he's like, listen, that stuff, it happens all the time. He's like, here's what happened. I also run a publishing firm. This is Kevin J. Anderson speaking. He said, I also run a publishing firm. I wrote Dan Shamble, and then one of the authors that had submitted to my slush pile went ape shit on me. and he said, I submitted a skeleton detective novel. You stole it from me, you asshole. And he went off. And he did this whole thing that I had been doing in my brain for 4 years, but he did it publicly and on Facebook and everything, and made out like Kevin J. Anderson was a great big thief and blah, 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 to the point where Kevin was hurting about it. And he's like, God, did I really steal this? He's like, I don't even look at the slush pile, but who knows? Did like my
Yeah.
slush reader tell me about it or something like that? And he's like, that, and then I felt good about myself because he was like, but you sent it to me and you didn't say any of that stuff, even though I'd been thinking it. He's like, you didn't say any of that stuff. You're just like, hey, we're guys in the same industry. We had a similar idea. Thought you might enjoy this. And he's like, and that got me over that whole fight with that crazy person.
Yeah.
And I was like, and now he knows my name. I'm like, you have no reason to know who I am except like I did a mitzvah, I did a good thing, like
It was kind of just like a great minds think alike, because coincidences. I do think that, especially if you belong to something, as I didn't realize until the last few years, by the way, that horror was so niche. Because I was brought up on it, I thought that everyone had at least some sort of base horror tastes, but apparently not. But because it feels big and small, the universe of horror publishing to me. But I think because a lot of us, we enjoy the same kinds of books, the same kinds of films. It's inevitable that if you also write, people are going to have similar ideas sometimes, because the pool of what we're drawing from for the stuff we enjoy, we like a lot of the same stuff. So it's just like it's going to happen. It's funny you should. That story is really funny to me because I don't think I've said this to you yet, but there was a story in the submissions for our werewolf anthology that had a title that was only one word off the title of my story that's in the book.
Yeah.
And it is quite a different kind of story, but I had that worry of like, oh my God, what if this guy, because this story didn't make it into the anthology, I thought, what if he thinks, oh, you just took my idea and then wrote your own story? But you can vouch, I sent you that story months ago,
Yeah.
before I read any of the submissions. So, but yeah, I had a little bit of a worry about that, as well, because, like, not that I did it, but I was worried that someone would think I did. Yeah, it's horrible. So let's talk a bit about French press publishing as well then.
Okay.
So you spent a few years there, submitting work and having work published through other independent presses and things, and then you launched French press publishing yourself. So that's your own little publishing imprint that you have there. So what made you decide that you wanted to do this? Because this is a lot more work.
Yeah, so it kind of happened organically. I owe a lot, and I think I talked about this in the collection. I owe a great deal to Lynn McNamee, who was my first publisher for BRAINEATER Jones, Red Adept Publishing. She took on the book, she published it, but she also kind of taught me what all these processes are. And it's all very arcane, I think, to the average person coming in. They just look at it and they're like, how do I make a cover? How do I do edits? How do I do all this stuff? Pardon me. I'm a little sick right now. It's just the time of the year. I don't know if I have the flu or what. So watching her, I learned what she was doing and how she did it. And then I went through, my goal was to my goal is always to get a big five deal and get a movie made, get millions of dollars and blah, 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 blah. But I basically had 4 or 5 publishers that I worked with, and I saw them doing things and I saw them doing different things. And by about 2018, I realized that I knew at least as much as the average small publisher did. That's not to say somebody like, I don't know, Clash or Kensington. Well, Kensington might be a medium publisher or whatever. But I was like, I know how to format a book. I know how to put a cover on a book. I know how to edit a book now, after being carefully mentored by, the people that mentored me and seeing it done 3 or 4 different ways. So for your audience, book contracts are usually typically for 5 years. If it's for more than 5 years, find out why. So then 2018 comes, so my stuff from 2013 was starting to come back to me, and I was like, well, I'd really like to keep these books published and continue to make money off of them. And one of the things I learned at this point was, and I think I probably learned this from Brian Keene, if you put a different cover on it and make the changes that maybe your editor didn't initially agree to, or if you're happy with your editing, throw in a short story or an introduction or something like that, you can now call it the author's preferred edition, or the, as the author initially imagined, or whatever. You can call your next publication
The director's
like
cut.
it's different. Yeah, the director's cut, exactly. So I put out BRAINEATER Jones, I put out Billy and the CLONEASAURUS, I put out the GHOUL Archipelago. And when you came into the picture, a couple of stories were simply not selling anywhere. And so I elected to do those initially through French press publishing, which was, I think, Broken Down Heroes was the first one, and that had been to literally everybody in New York and the small press world at that point. I had an agent for a few years who was actively trying to sell that, and it just never happened. Just never happened. So I put that one out, and I was like, okay, like I can do this not just with the titles that I'm getting back, but also with brand new titles. And then Summer Canon, not really my story to tell, but she had a publisher from hell experience, similar to what I outlined with Permuted in the book. But it wasn't Permuted, it was somebody else, and it's not my story to tell. But she had just had a publisher from hell experience. So I said, well, look, I can't promise you great sales, but I can promise I'm going to pay you on time, and I'm going to pay you everything you're worth, and this and that. So I was going to open up that capacity that I had, that I have a small staff and I have, my editing, capacity and everything. And I'm fortunate to have a day job that I can front the money for something like this. So I took on Summer's Your Mine, and that opened up the doors. And then after that, like I'm very choosy.
Yep. I always tell everyone Steve hates everything. So if you recommend a book to me, I'm like, right, okay.
This is true. This is true. So yeah, but like there's no magic formula to it at this point. Like I've taken people over the transom.
Mhm.
I've taken people because they come highly recommended and we worked something out on the side. I did find this out at British Fantasy Con, that when you present yourself as a publisher, people treat you very differently than when you present yourself as an author. Suddenly you're important and people want to come up
Oh,
and sit down.
really?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah. Because when you're a writer at a table, you always get in that conversation where they're like, can you introduce me to your publisher? And in this case, I was like, I'm a publisher. They're like, oh, I have something for you. So I'd be like, here you go. Let me know. Let me see it. And then the next thing that launched off after that was the Perfectly Fine Neighborhood. And that was, I'll go ahead and tell it now because I think we've made all the money we're going to make off of that. That was kind of a marketing ploy. So the Perfectly Fine House came out in March of 2020. And I know memories are short in this world for some reason. But something else was going on in March of 2020. and our book was just completely overshadowed by the pandemic, and I don't think it ever got the fair shake that it should have gotten. And I'm a huge fan of Warhammer, if you can't tell from all my little Warhammer guys back there, or my Warhammer tattoos that I was showing off to Mike Brooks in England and everything. So like one of my great dreams is to get in with the Black Library, which is the Games Workshop publishing imprint. And I noticed every year when they have an quote unquote open call, they always say, make sure you've read a couple of our recent releases to know what we're looking for. And every year, like clockwork, I go and I buy a couple of their releases. When I see that, I'm like, okay, I listen to them now. I'm going to type up my thing. And then I was like, wait a minute. They're doing this to get you to buy their books. And I was like, okay, what if we do this with the Perfectly Fine House? We open it up for an open call, and it's a legitimate open call. We paid, not quite pro rates, but we paid very well. But we said fundamentally, you have to have read the book if you even want to submit. Like it's in universe, so if you don't know anything about this universe, you're just gonna get rejected. And that book actually turned out to be quite a bit more popular than the original, but it also drove sales of the original a lot. So, it was good.
Yeah, I really enjoyed working on the Perfectly Fine Neighborhood. I would like to say for people though that might be thinking anything at the moment, to be fair, in your submission guidelines for the Perfectly Fine Neighborhood, you did put the basic rules of the world in there. You did recommend that people read the novel because obviously people who'd read the novel did have a much higher chance of getting in because everything would definitely be in universe. But yeah, you did put in the submission guidelines, right? Here are all the basic rules of the world though, so people could submit without doing that. And I know there were a lot of email back and forth with authors that wanted to submit. They were asking questions, clarifying little details and things like that. I will say because I read the slush pile for that anthology as well. I could tell who had paid attention to the universe rules and who had already written a ghost story, and then they tried to shoehorn it in, because it is while we're here, so the Perfectly Fine House, that's another one of my favorites of yours, because that is a ghost novel, but it's set in a world where everybody knows that ghosts are real and they sort of coexist with the living, and it was just a really different take on ghosts. And I do like ghost stories, but I typically don't aim for them if I'm looking to buy books, because I find they get a bit samey. So this was a complete departure from anything I'd ever read in a ghost book, and the thing that was frightening in that book is that for some reason ghosts are disappearing. And it was just such an interesting take, which you co-wrote that with Wiley Young. Should say that before we go on, just make sure we include Wiley in that. But yeah, that was such an entertaining story for many. I'm wondering, when you and Wiley were writing that, did you like go back and forth like a chapter each, or did you like rewrite each other's parts, or like how did you write it? Because it reads like one person wrote it.
Really? Mm-hmm. We did. So there were two characters. One was the older, more experienced sister, and one was the younger, more intemperate brother. Mm-hmm. So I wrote the sister because I figured that my prose right off the bat would be a little more measured and clean. And then Wiley, and at the time, he's a much more experienced author now, but at the time I think only had maybe one other novel out. He took the brother. So any like kind of craziness in the prose on his end would come off like craziness in the character. And then so then I cleaned the whole thing very clean. And I told him at the time, I was like, this is going to be up to my standard. If my name is on the cover, it's going to be up to my standard throughout. Now pay attention. I'm like, because if you want to work with me again, you need to pay attention. So I went through and I redlined the shit out of it. Just I was like, and then I went through it with him and I was like, here's why I did this, here's why I did this, here's why I did this. And so that's why you get that feel. I'm like, I always think reading it, I'm like, oh, it's very obvious that it's two different people, but it's good to hear that it feels like one person.
Well, that's because you were one of the authors, though, so you know.
Right.
But yeah, it's going to be really distinctive to you. I red pen the shit out of stuff, but only my own. Well, no, if I'm doing an editing job, I suppose. But I red pen myself more than I tend to. Like, this is shit. That can all go.
So then we collaborated again for Clickers Never Die, and he would like, I mean, of course I like to toot my own horn, you know me, but I'll start this sentence by saying I don't like to toot my own horn, but he was a much better collaborator at that point, because I had taken him through the road, and maybe it's just with me, but I think in general he's a much better author. He's really, I've been able to watch his development as an author in real time, and take complete credit for it. It's all me developing him. No, obviously, Wiley is a very good friend and a very good author, and a Splatterpunk award winner. He's great. But with Clickers Never Die, it was a much easier process, and he did kind of tell me, he's like, all that editing and stuff we did on Perfectly Fine House, that has helped me, you know. And I'm like, I can see it. I can see it on the page now.
Yeah, I think it is useful to have people who are willing to be blunt with stuff like that, because I don't think it doesn't help anybody to go, oh, I'll just not say anything about that little sentence. And I appreciate people who are willing to completely rip my stuff to pieces, even if it means I've got to rewrite entire chapters or whatever I'm doing, or rather than publish something that someone else already gave a go-ahead on, not thinking it was great. So, yeah. Okay, so Broken Down Heroes. So I know that we've got to wrap up soon, but I just want to say about Broken Down Heroes is quite a departure. Broken Down Heroes of the Western Nights, full title, and it is quite a departure from your. I would describe you mostly as a horror author of the various subgenres, and then you do have a couple of works that sit outside of that a little bit. But Broken Down Heroes is the one that's like, that's the anomaly for regular readers of yours, I would say. Did you? I'm assuming that, I know that you used some of your own knowledge base and everything for that story. What made you want to write that? Because I know you, because you have a reputation for horror, so I'm just wondering if you had any concerns about publishing something that was so far outside.
Oh yeah, I had enormous concerns about it. So what made me want to write that? If you're familiar with Chuck Wendig, I guess most of your people are going to be familiar with Chuck Wendig. I have taken this, I still think of this 10 years later. He just wrote down one day, he was like, you know what you have to do to be an author? He's like, you have to write 300 words a day. And he just broke down the math. And he's like, look, if you write 300 words a day, you're getting whatever it breaks down to, like 2 solid novels a year. And he's like, the problem is you never sit down and write 300 words a day. You write them in great spurts, 5,000 this day and then nothing for a week. And, you know, we're all like that. And I said to myself, that's interesting. And once he had said this, I said, I'm going to do that. I'm going to write 300 words a day until I finish this novel. And what I realized, he was kind of like telling, you know, the old saying, like, if you can put salt on a bird's tail, you can catch it. Mm-hmm. And it's kind of a joke. It's kind of a riddle. It's like, if you can get close enough to a bird to put salt, the salt's not doing anything. It's that you're close enough to grab the bird. And I realized, oh, if you sit down and write 300 words a day, you're not going to stop. The problem is you don't sit down and write every day. So when I sit down, once I'd gotten 300 words in, I was like, I'm in the middle of a paragraph. I'm going to keep going. And then when I had and so what I was doing with that story, I don't want to be too grandiose about this, but it's not completely autobiographical, because some of it has to do with the stories that we hear in the Army. So I don't know to what extent people know this, but the military has a great storytelling tradition. And a lot of it is bullshit, but it's like cautionary tales. It's kind of like fairy tales, like in their original form, were like meant to be cautionary. So like you would have these sergeants that would like tell a guy like, "Hey, do you know what happened to Private Snuffy? He got killed because he didn't do XYZ and when he was in the motor bay." And the point is like safety first or whatever. Like there's like that there probably never really was a Private Snuffy, you know, but these stories get passed down. And I was like, there's so much of this in the army, and I get why that is, because then we also all have like our own real world stories where we're like, oh, this crazy thing happened to me. I slipped in the mud and blah 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 blah, or I got really drunk in Korea. Uh, and I was like, nobody ever captures this storytelling ethos that I've seen. Like war stories or war novels and stuff are always very like either grim and gritty or something like that. And I was like, I would love to capture that. So I took some stories that happened to me. I took some stories that I had heard that I think probably happened to real people. And I took some stories that, pardon me, I know are complete bullshit and are just like cautionary tales. And I set it up in this way that there was like a framing device, and it would seem kind of weird and all over the place, except for the framing device that there's two people that are telling each other stories. So I sat down, and what I did was I made a list of all the stories that I wanted to include in this theoretical novel. And then I took Chuck's advice and I wrote 300 words on each story every day. And then the novel came out fully formed. And then to your question about like, were you scared to put this out? I was terrified. I wasn't even going to put it out under my real name. I thought to myself, I was like, this is the time to do a pseudonym and everything. And I talked to everybody about like, should I put this out under my own name? I'm a horror guy. The horror people aren't going to want this, and the other people that are going to look up my stuff are going to find out it's a bunch of horror, and then they're but ultimately I decided to put it out under my own name because I was like, what am I going to do? I'm going to create a whole new social media presence for this one book, and I haven't followed up on it yet, so I've talked to you about it. I'm thinking about maybe releasing different genre, doing a re-release of all my stuff in the different genres. But yeah, I mean, it was very scary.
I can imagine if you're not like pigeonholed, but if you've got regular readers that pick up your books for your regular type of stuff you write, I can imagine that that would be a bit nerve-wracking. The storytelling aspect of that book I really enjoyed, and I'll tell you what it reminded me of. Christopher Lee wrote an autobiography called The Lord of Misrule, and he served in the military as well, and his military stories are preposterous. Like, I've told other people about that. I'm like, you won't believe what Christopher Lee wrote about his time in the military and stuff. And I think what it was is that everyone outside of the military has this idea of what like men especially in the military are like, and nobody ever thinks silly getting drunk and playing chicken with tanks, which is one of the things that Christopher Lee put in there, something to do with tanks drunk anyway. And so I think that what you did really well in that book is sort of remind everybody that even if people have got quite a set label and there's an image that goes with it, like people are just people.
Yeah.
As well, and everyone has got silly work stories, and it doesn't matter where you work because the common element is that humans are working there. So there's going to be stuff. I really enjoyed it. I thought it was entertaining in a completely different way to what I'm used to with your work, but it had quite a lot of heart as well, that book. And I knew it was leading somewhere, and then I was mad at you.
Yeah, lots of people are.
Meant it as a compliment. Don't want to say anything else about that. Spoil it for anybody. Do you have a favorite piece of your own work that you wish had a bit more love publicly?
I think Yes, I Am a Vampire has displaced the Ghoul Archipelago at this point. When people ask me this question, I've always said the Ghoul Archipelago up until now, because it feels a little bit underserved for how long it's been bouncing around. And I always thought it would kind of pick up that cult audience.
Mm-hmm.
I never quite did. But right now, I really had high hopes, because this is like my love letter to like the fledgling authors and stuff that I've helped out a lot of you. Not you personally, but you in the audience. I've helped out a lot of you, and you've asked me these questions, and I put them all in a book for you. So where are you guys now? It's probably just a marketing problem on my end, because I'm like, it's a book that's not about vampires with a vampire in the title, and
I think it's just that it's a collection, Stephen, because the number of like book bloggers and review websites and everything, the number of sites and people who review things all year round, and they've just put the caveat in of like, I don't do short story collections. It's just not, they're just not as easy to promote for that reason as novels. I think that that's what it is, if it hasn't picked up much traction yet. But I think that when people start reading it, it will get shared, because something I keep telling people about it is like great collection of short stories for a start, especially if you already like the kind of stuff that you write. And because these are earlier works, a lot of these are going to be things that your newer readers haven't read. So
right.
it fills out, especially for people like me, where like once I find an author I like to own everything that they've published, and this makes it very easy for people to get some of your earlier work. It's all in one place now instead of spread out over lots of anthologies. Wait, I went off on a tangent midway through my own point. What was I going to say? Oh, it's going to come back to me later. That's going to annoy me. What was I saying? I'm so sorry.
You're saying it's hard to market because it's a collection.
Oh, yes. Sorry. Thank you. So the thing I've been telling people is the unique selling point of this book for me, for sure, above all of the books of its type for the nonfiction part, is, like I said when we first started talking, that you've actually, talked about the specific press, talked about the money side a little bit. Like, you've been really candid about some of your personal experiences. And so, like, as the kids say these days, like, it's full of tea. Have I used that properly? Like,
you're asking me? I'm older than you. Yeah. No, definitely.
Nothing to do with tea, guys. There's tea.
You're the Riz. Skibbity Ohio.
And it does make it more. There were bits that I was reading, and I was like, what? You have paced it all really well as well, because that permuted press stuff, you're like, oh, I'll get back to that in a little bit. And I was like, no, it's not like it. So it's quite a page turner, in that it's all broken down into these nice little sections. So if you only have 10 minutes in a day to read, you can still read a whole little section of the book. You don't have to stop halfway through a chapter or something. But then also, because like I was dying to know all of this stuff, I was like, gotta keep going. So it was a fast read for me for that reason, because I just had to know. I just had to know all of this stuff. Do you think that you're going to do another when do you think you'll do a collection?
When?
Yeah.
I don't know. I have enough for I think it's 2016 to 2021 or something like that. I mean, like the next bit of stories is ready to go. Mm-hmm. I don't think I quite have enough for collection number 3, but then I'd have to go and write the story notes again, and I just got done doing. Well, it's been a year at this point. Although I feel like I've been editing this forever. Yeah, what did we just come out with in September? So, I don't know.
Do you think you'll follow this format again for the next one?
Oh yeah. That would be my intention going forward.
Mm-hmm. Did you enjoy writing all of the story notes part? Because it's quite different to writing fiction when you're putting your own stuff down.
I did, and I was much more frank in the initial pass. So if you think this was frank, I went off on a couple people, and there was a lot of stuff I was just like, oh no, you can't say that publicly.
Oh, so even you had a line for you, like, wait a second, to pull back a little bit.
Oh yeah. Oh no. Like when I was initially writing it, I was just like going off on some people, and I went back through and I was like, okay, you do still have to work in this industry, so like the people that I did call out in this book like fully deserved it, and there's nothing is it libel or slander when it's in print? There's nothing slanderous in it.
Mm.
It's just stuff that happens. So
Yeah.
okay, take me for it. I'll be like, all right, let's dig up the emails, bro. Um,
I've got the receipts.
yeah, and also, so who's gonna sue me over?
Yeah.
I should be so lucky. It'd probably be a big news story. But
Yeah, drive the sales of your book up. So what are you working on right now?
right now, oh, okay. Well, I finished a little secret project that actually nobody's ever going to know about. Well, they're not going to know it was me anyway. But aside from Strange New Moons, which is the werewolf anthology that is almost complete from French Press Publishing, I did start work on my AI novel. It is not an AI generated novel. It is a novel about a couple of authors that go to a convention that's Artificon, and the guest of honor at the convention is a little AI device that has written everybody's favorite recent couple of novels that have come out in the space of like a few weeks. And so these authors are at the convention doing the normal, like miserable, like, oh, hey, let me give you the hard sell thing. Meanwhile, this little AI device has a line out the door that everybody's in line, and they're enthralled by this thing because it's writing, the kind of throwaway novels that a certain kind of people like. And they decide, because the publisher that sent the AI device is still, cheap. So they didn't really send a very well paid. They just sent an intern to, kind of watch over the device and be like, yeah, take it to your room at night. So they realized that they can actually take the device and go on a wild rampage, and like their plan is to go like, hit it with baseball bats and stuff. But then as they go out, drinking and carousing with the little AI device, they slowly are like, oh, you're like our pal now. So it's kind of like a cross between, I don't know, Weekend at Bernie's and Leaving Las Vegas or something like that.
Oh my god, that sounds great. Very topical.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have to get this written ASAP, or AI is. Did you hear about this AI company that's planning to release like thousands of novels next year?
Yeah, it's so ridiculous. I'm not as worried about AI written books as a lot of people seem to be at the moment. And maybe I should be more worried. It's just, I don't know. Maybe I'm being short-sighted about it. I don't deem it a big threat to authors. I guess unless the major publishers start only using AI to, but like, I don't know, I read more indie press stuff anyway now these days, so maybe I'm just like, whatever. But okay, that sounds cool. I'm looking forward to reading that when you're done. So for everybody watching or listening, I'm going to put the links to Stephen's website and also the French Press Publishing website in the description. And also I've got the nice little links for all of your books there, Stephen, as well. So I'll throw all of those in, so you can just click on it and it'll take you to your country's Amazon And maybe I'll put a little synopsis, a little one line in for each book, like a little library, a little catalogue. And you can find Steve on all the social media, pretty much.
Pretty much.
There aren't that many Kozeniewskis about. Or Steve, I've never met another Steve Kozeniewski myself, so he's easy to find.
There is one other one, but he's not on any social media, so.
Oh, well, there you go. There you go.
That's my dad. Yeah.
Thanks for doing this, Steve, and rounding off our year of author interviews. We started with this. We started doing author interviews this year. We started with Richard Dansky, who you know. So yeah, opened with Richard Dansky and closed with you for the end of the year now. So yeah, thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me.
We'll have to have you back when you've got your AI book out so we can talk about it. Okay, and for everyone, I'm just going to say bleat and see you next time.